That's a realistic part of your balance, trying to enjoy the wins as much as trying to get yourself ready for the next game?
Yeah, in the early days, yeah, I think we didn't know any different. I actually was chatting to someone this morning outside about holidays and going away, and I think it was Philip Egan actually about letting the handbrake off and not doing any sort of training and just going, you know, the diet and the alcohol for a couple of weeks and then coming back pre-season being very difficult. But all that's changed now, and I was saying to you on Monday, I was out in Portugal last week and a load of professional athletes there on holidays, and they're all training. They're all doing kind of active recovery in the morning. It's unbelievable, Stephen, to see the way sport has changed. Like, you know, I remember going to Turkey in 1998 and coming back after 2 weeks, and Declan Kidney was our coach at the time, and Niall O'Donovan. They were the head coach and forwards coach, and John Hayes and myself were in Portugal, Anthony Foley, and we were back doing pre-season, running around the field, doing, I think, five-minute runs. It was a bit of a kind of a loosener, and Declan Kidney and Niall O'Donovan were ahead of us in the five-minute runs. We were supposed to be the athletes. So as the years went on, you know, the culture changed, and you know, you couldn't go away for 4 weeks then and just not do anything. So, you know, if you have a few drinks, there'd be some bit of a fitness session the next day to try and, you know, burn the calories off some bit, and that's just the way it is now. So it's just interesting listening to the boys there about Tuesday night in Dublin, a week and a half before a big Dublin game. But it's probably the same in the Gats, getting that balance right. Sports people have to, you know, some people don't drink at all, some people like to have a few pints, and it's just getting that balance right in all sport, and maybe relaxing and being able to switch off is important, because even in amateur sport, these guys are amateurs, GAA players, and you know, they have the pressure that's there is phenomenal. So separating that pressure with a bit of real life stuff is a good thing. And I've heard it's happened in rugby a lot, times where there's been a tough couple of weeks and a couple of losses, and the best thing to do is go as a group and have a few pints together and try and switch off and take away that pressure. So there's a fine line and a balance. You mentioned the word balance at the start. For any athlete, if you get fit, it's easier to stay fit and have a couple of drinks and stay at the top end of your fitness levels, and you drop down a little bit, you get back up. If you're unfit and you're consuming alcohol, well, you climb up a bit and you're down at this level all the time. So getting that balance right is important. And I would never judge anyone for having a few drinks. I don't drink very much now, which is strange after I'm retired. I didn't really drink much when I played, but maybe in those earlier days there was certainly a culture in rugby of play a match on Saturday, 2 or 3 days, you know.
Would it be 2 or 3 days?
Well, you'd a Saturday night and you'd probably go on a Sunday and you might have a few pints on Monday night or something, but we've heard that from soccer players, the old school soccer players over the years, haven't we? Roy Keane talking about the Monday clubs and in Manchester and stuff like that. But all sport has changed now, you know. You just can't do it. The fitness levels and the intensity that, the pace that teams play in all sport now is just different.
Yeah, it's funny you even say about the amateurs, because I even say the League of Ireland lads now.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of them would be part-time players, and, you know, they had a mid-season break only a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of them are Instagramming pictures of them doing gym work, whatever, over in Abu Dhabi or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, again, like, I suppose you have to, all credit to the
if you can visualise
players.
a shot of John Hayes, Anthony Foley, myself, I had a couple of more. Rhys Ellison was there, played with Shannon. Colin McMahon played with Shannon at the time. Paul McMahon. There was about 6 or 7 rugby players, and then a few guys who didn't play rugby. If I could show you a shot of us lying around the pool at around 2 or 3 o'clock in an afternoon, after having probably coming home at 6 o'clock in the morning, that wouldn't be
wonderful image.
It wouldn't be a pretty sight.
I dare say that that's anything that the Irish players have even kind of flirted with the idea of during their off-season. They seem to have come back in pretty good shape. They seem to have come back in ferocious shape, because we've seen the news this week that Johnny Sexton is after dislocating his thumb. Rory O'Connor had the line in the Irish Independent as well, that the training sessions going up against one another are fairly ferocious.
Yeah, I think the first week was pretty intense, and maybe it was just to shock the players back. And look, pre-season is always tough. In my time as a rugby player, it was probably the one time of the year. The first 2 to 3 weeks are the worst, because it is a bit of a shock coming back in and having to do the fitness test and all the fitness sessions. It's tough. It's mentally and physically challenging. And then 3 weeks in, you're actually enjoying the challenge of pushing yourself into fitness, the weights, all that kind of stuff. And gradually the rugby comes back and you get to enjoy it. But pre-season is hard. And I think they had, most of the players had only 3 weeks off. They trained for 2 weeks when they came back, and then they got a week off last week, and that was kind of active training, recovery, and keep the body ticking over. So it's tough time for them, and they have a big build-up, obviously, throughout the summer. They have a lot of camps, and they've got to get the balance right of the load, the workload, being on the feet. Some guys will need to build up strength more, other guys maybe the endurance. And it's the sports science now is phenomenal. From like I said, when I started in 1996, I made my debut for Munster. 97, signed my first contract. To where it's gone now, it's intriguing for me every time I kind of look at these guys and see this type of training they're doing, the way they have to look after themselves with diet, nutrition, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really important, and it always is. I played at 3 World Cups, and the build-ups to all 3 were probably a bit different, and the one that probably sticks out that maybe we didn't get right, and we didn't know at the time as players, and Eddie O'Sullivan and his coaches probably didn't know at the time either. It was a very intense kind of period throughout the summer where we were on our feet a lot. And then there's a lot of questions after what happened in France in 2007. Why were the team so flat? And maybe it was something to do with the training. I think it was definitely something to do with it closer to the matches, because we were doing a lot of hard physical sessions, full-on sessions against each other. And that's what Jason Cowan has to get right, and Joe Schmidt and his coaches this summer is getting that balance right. I thought it was brilliant that they had they came back for those 2 weeks, then got the week off, which wasn't completely off because they all had training programs to continue to do fitness sessions.
It freshens the head a small bit.
It's getting that balance right in the build-up to the warm-up games, and they're moving around the country for the next few weeks. They're in Galway this week, they're in Limerick next week. I'm sure they'll be going up the north as well, and it's just getting that balance right for the next few weeks is important.
How do you keep players interested? Because it's such a long time to be in the camp together. We're 12th of July now. Yeah. They're going to be together now right until hopefully the World Cup final. But they're going to be together in camp. Like, it must be so hard, and there must be times where players start getting rally with each other. They start,
you get a bit of cabin fever. There's no doubt about that, and I think part and parcel of maybe learning from the past a little bit. And Rory Best who's captain now, was there in 07. He would kind of remember all that period and the intensity of the whole thing. And you want a competitive edge in a squad where they're kind of narky and going at each other in training, and that there's a demand for a high standard even when they're doing small skills sessions and stuff like that. And again, Stephen, as you say, if you're in Sunday night and you're there till Friday evening and you're heading back home for 2 days, that Saturday and Sunday can go very quickly, you know what I mean? And you have to try and balance the family, and a lot of them have young kids as well, and you're back in. So I don't have the schedule for the next week. I'm sure there's a few half weeks and shorter weeks as well in with some of it. But ultimately, as a player, that's the sacrifice they've got to make. And there will be a demand on their time and in the next while to try and get them right. They've got a certain amount of work to get done. There's 45 players, I think, in the group at the moment. Maybe a few more will be added and might be added during that period. And that's a balance they've got to get. They have to add in a little bit of fun as well. So they may have a night or two out, or a few quiet drinks together, game of golf if they're wherever they're staying. But it's probably the coaches will try and grab them and do as much as they can with them, because they're trying to pack in a lot of stuff, and that's where Jason Cowan, he's got to. But they're all monitored now with heart rate monitors. They have a nutritionist with them as well. So the doctors, everyone, they'll monitor the load and stuff like that. And then there's a senior group which you have who'll say, well, we are overtrained, or we are tired, or we are grumpy. Can we have tomorrow off? Can we go home a day earlier? And that's kind of the way it works, you know. But there's a certain amount of work that they're going to have to just put through, because they're playing games now in August, you know, and they're trying to build up the fitness at the moment. There's probably not, and it's getting that contact situation right, that certain guys need more strength and other guys need more fitness, you know, more endurance stuff.
Yeah, like I'm all for the idea of high intensity stuff this time, because you look at what they're doing in the Southern Hemisphere with the Rugby Championship and all that, but then the byproduct of that is Johnny Sexton getting injured.
Yeah, but look, that's going to happen. Ultimately, the main goal here and the first goal is to get super fit, to get in great condition. There's no point in loading all the rugby stuff in, and they know better. And, you know, as I said about the sports science, they'll do that. There's no point in getting all the rugby stuff in at the start and not being fit enough. They've got to build up an endurance, a speed, a power, and a strength base that doesn't just take them through World Cup, but kind of maintains them throughout the season. So that's kind of the primary goal. But you have to have an intensity there. You have to have an edge. You have to have guys, you know, going at each other. In 2007, we probably had a lot of dust-ups in training. We had a narkiness.
Who were the dust-ups involving?
Forwards. It's usually the forwards, you know what I mean? When they go at each other, scrums and lineouts and stuff like that. And then you go full contact games, effectively, and it's...
Are you talking like proper... like almost brawl-like conditions?
That happens with every team, you know. It's not a full-on brawl. There's always a few slaps thrown here and there, and that's just par for the course.
You want that though, do you?
Yeah.
The coaches want it anyway. They want to see guys being... But that rugby is like that. When you have that physical confrontation, you're always going to get someone holding onto a jersey and someone swinging back, or someone coming in offside or stuff like that.
Provincial lines come in there, is there...
No, I've seen Munster fellas beat. Well, I've been involved in a few beating the heads off each other, and everyone else standing back just kind of saying, "Don't get involved here. You could get a slap yourself," and maybe they need to get a bit of steam off. But look, that happens, and that's important. And I think the build up to this is, I've a real good feeling about this group, that they're going to be. Physically and mentally in a good place come the World Cup.
The other thing as well, I would imagine there's been plenty of home videos made by Joe Schmidt from the last few months for players to have a look at, and plenty of things that he wants them to see that they did wrong over the last few months.
And look, Joe's is very intense with the players, and they know that. And I think I'd say every single player, Stephen, throughout the group that was involved in the Six Nations would have had a one-on-one with Joe Schmidt and his coaches, and gone through the do's, the don'ts, the wrongs, the rights, and they'll know where they've got to work on, where they're at, and what's expected of them. And that's the detail. The success and what Joe Schmidt has delivered to Leinster and Ireland has been phenomenal. And I've said this after the Six Nations. I think the criticism and some of the negativity attached with the group was unfair. So a little bit justified, but maybe the way a bit of predictability in the Six Nations, and maybe not being able to cope with that high elevation that they had. But I think having it happen in the Six Nations is better than the World Cup. And ultimately, either way, you know, if we get to a quarter-final, we're going to have to play New Zealand or South Africa. It's going to be incredibly...
It's going to be
incredibly difficult anyway.
Just very quickly on that, like if we get into a situation where we were in 2015 with a load of injuries and stuff, like the Sexton injury now gives the opportunity for Jack Carthy and Ross Byrne to perhaps be putting their hand up in training a little bit. Does the injury kind of have that sort of impact on the team?
Yeah, it does. I've dislocated my thumb many times. And I've broken my thumbs. They're 4 to 6 week job. They don't really, they keep him out of contact and stuff like that, and some of the weights training it'll be modified, but it's not going to have a huge effect. But I think it is, when there's some 50-50 decisions here that will ultimately happen in Joe's selection, some of the training stuff will come down to it as well. And if you're training well and grabbing the attention, but also your fitness scores. So if you're kind of blowing people out of the water with your fitness tests and your power tests, and they're improving and they're really high and they grab a bit of attention, that can have an effect as well. So it is an opportunity for Carty and Byrne, who may be going head to head for a seat in the plane, you know. So that's where that kind of, that you mentioned, that bit of edge that you want from players, and you as coaches, you want to sit back and you want to see them going at each other, and challenging other, not in a bad way, but really with a high standard of attack and defence and the way they put their bodies on the line.
Just very briefly before we wrap up, a couple of other things. Beauden Barrett has transferred to the Blues from the Hurricanes, one of the biggest transfers they've ever seen down there. This is going to result in a sabbatical as well at the end of the World Cup. So there's a couple of interesting threads to this story.
It's phenomenal. I didn't think, I thought he was a Hurricane through and through, and there's obviously, that happens a bit more in New Zealand. We've seen with Joey Carberry going down to Munster, the shock, and maybe because of the high profile nature of it, we've seen players move provincially before, but for Barrett to do that is surprising. He's their prize asset, really, so giving him a sabbatical is something that probably happened. The first one to happen to was probably McCaw a few years ago.
Yeah, Carter as well.
Carter's done it, did it after, and effectively some of them are going to Japan now, so that's as good as a sabbatical, because they probably only play 10-12 games there in their season there. So it's an interesting one that it's happened, and one I was surprised with.
Yeah, then just the final one before we wrap up this morning. Obviously, Les Kiss's comments yesterday surrounding Paddy Jackson. A couple of interesting threads to it. He says, I think there's more support than not for the decision to bring Paddy Jackson in. Do you reckon that's the case, that London Irish fans are more supportive than not?
Yeah, look, I think the vast majority of people, you can't forget what happened, and you must remember they were acquitted, but you can't forget the whole story and maybe some of the behaviours that were there which were not good. But I think, I think it's time to let him move on and let him just play now. And I understand people will always have reservations there, and Diageo pulled out as sponsors, and that's their right to do that. But it's something he had to address yesterday in the press conference, and he's probably going to be asked about it a lot throughout the time that Paddy is there. But I just hope he gets back playing and is allowed play there now. He played the year in Pepperyon. It was a poor Pepperyon team that he was on. They got beaten a lot. This is a kind of a new project in London Irish where they've signed a lot of good players and they've invested a lot of money. So he probably knows better that the vast majority, probably rugby people in London Irish, will support. There'll always be, unfortunately, a divisive nature to Paddy being playing or Stuart Olding. He was
speaking about him, that we signed him as a rugby player and that's all that matters. Is that all that matters?
It's not all that matters. I think you've got to weigh. They would have weighed up the baggage that came with Paddy and the situation. But like I said, they were acquitted. For me, it's done and dusted. You can't completely forget it, but I think it's a little bit unfair to keep beating him with a stick over this. And people probably have an opinion that I'm wrong for saying that. I just think, you got to respect the process that happened, and you can't forget the behaviour and the text messages and stuff like that. But they were acquitted, and I think it's time to let them just get on with their lives now. I think it's always going to be difficult for them if they ever come back and try to come back and play in Ireland. But
do you think that's a realistic possibility?
It's going to be very difficult, I think. It's going to be very difficult, but I think, I hope he goes well with London Irish now, and I hope he plays well, and maybe it could happen in a couple of years that he might come back and end up playing for Ireland again. It's a heavy price to pay, and people will say the girl in question has paid a heavy price as well, but I think from that situation, for the way their careers have gone, and that the prospect of never playing for Ireland again is a big price for him to pay. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. And I hope there's no protests and objections now every time they go out and play a game, because I don't think that's going to do anyone any good.
Alan, we'll chat to you next Monday. I think we're getting into our depth chart next week. Going to start going through the plane that's going to go to Tokyo. So we'll start picking your squad.
Bums on seats, yeah. We might get a few bums on seats from here as well.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Right. So Vodafone are offering a lucky customer the chance to win a trip of a lifetime to support Irish rugby in Japan this September as part of the Team of Us. The winner and their +1 will win business class flights, tours, and the sights and sounds of Japan, accommodation, and a whopping $5,000 in spending money.
That's serious. serious prize.
It's a serious prize. And to enter, simply download the My Vodafone app and check out the Fantastic Days offer. The competition is open until the 21st of July. We're going to tweet out details from @OffTheBall on Twitter as well in a little while if you missed any of that. Right, here is former heavyweight contender Jerry Cooney talking about his appearance on The Simpsons.